Welcome to Silberman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, episode 36, where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is September 19th, 2024. And I'm Phil Silberman, owner of the firm and your host. And I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Black, who works out of our Dallas office. How are you doing today, Mr. Black?
Doing great. I'm glad to be doing episode 36 today.
Let's get it going. What's on our docket today, Austin?
So it is a slow legal news week. I saw this in the news and was really hoping we weren't going to have to talk about it, but alas and alack. So Sean Diddy Combs, was charged with sex trafficking and racketeering. So we're going to talk about that because I'm sure Diddy is at the top priority list of all of our listeners right now. So we will make sure to get that in for you today on the Silberman Law Firm podcast. Okay. And then next, we will be talking about a Texas education commissioner who called for a cell phone ban in schools for students. Not for college students, but for students lower than that. Yeah. Will be what goes into that exactly and the legal implications there. Then we'll be moving on to our legal questions section, talking about first, what are ground leases? How do they work? Can you get one? Do you need one? Etc. And then, can a landlord enter a tenant's property without notice in Texas? The answer is it depends, but we'll get to that. That's always the legal answer. And then, is it legal to break a hot car window to rescue an animal in Texas? It depends on how cute the animal is. No, that's not really the answer. We'll let you know. And then finally, our rant and rave section. Should parents be responsible for the school-related activities of their children? What do you think?
There you go. That animal thing is actually pretty interesting. I saw that at the show outline.
Yeah, no, but my response to how that should be analyzed is actually what I think, but that's not the legal application.
No, we'll do the law according to Austin, and we'll do the legal applications.
Okay.
All right, let's kick off our legal news section, and we're talking about Sean Diddy Combs, and I think that this is big news. And we had to do this because it really is all over, and people are very much interested in it. So, not that we are, but we are here to serve the listener, so we need to talk a little bit about it. I knew him as Puff Daddy. So when I was like a kid in high school, he was Puff Daddy. And he was basically Biggie Smalls' sidekick is how I knew it. Notorious B.I.G. He was the sidekick. I remember his most famous song, best song he ever had. I think it's one of the top selling singles ever was I'll Be Missing You from 1997. Have you heard of that one, Austin?
I think that's the only song I've heard from him, but yes. Yeah.
Well, it was a tribute because Biggie was murdered and Puff Daddy at the time. He did this tribute song. It's still a very popular song. That's the one Austin heard. Number one on the Billboard Hot 100 for 11 weeks. Certified best-selling singles of all time. So net worth of Mr. Combs there, it's hard to pin that kind of stuff down, but depending upon the source, somewhere between $400 million and $1 billion, depending upon the source of
somewhere around that range. Yeah. I love those like websites that do analyses of people's net worth. And when they have this broad of a range, it's very funny. They could be making $50,000 a year, or they could be making $20 million. It's somewhere there.
You don't really know. When you get to have enough money, it's difficult to calculate net worth because you have a lot of assets that are not super liquid, and you get into valuation issues and all that. But fairly rich guy. For comparison purposes, Taylor Swift's net worth is about $1.3 billion. And I think my guess would be P. Diddy's net worth quite a bit less than Taylor Swift, especially after all the trouble that he's been getting into. So, he's accused of doing some very bad stuff.
Yes.
And have you ever been to a freak off, Austin?
A freak off.
Okay, so
if it involves sex trafficking or racketeering, no, I have not.
That's the right answer. So, the indictment describes that Puff Daddy or P. Diddy would organize these multi-day events referred to as freak-offs, where Combs coerced victims into performing sexual acts, often involving commercial sex workers. I don't know. I guess a commercial sex worker would be like a porn star. So
I don't know. I don't know what the difference between a commercial sex worker and a non-commercial sex worker. Is that like a union?
I think you say if you're into that kind of thing, maybe, but I don't think you want to go to a freak off. And these they were often recorded and used. They were controlling the victims through threats and violence, and they would often, I guess, beat them up and maybe put them in hotel rooms, and then they would imprison them in hotel rooms for a while. All this occurring between 2008 and the indictment in 2024, abuse, exploitation, that kind of thing. But I think he had two houses, or he probably had more of that, who knows, but he had one in Miami and one in Los Angeles. And the authorities seized more than 1,000 bottles of lubricant, baby oil, drugs, multiple firearms, including AR-15 rifles. That's a lot of lubricant and baby oils. These must have been some huge freak offs that he was engaged in. So
I'm glad we do not have any evidence of that. That's great. I'm glad that we're not reviewing any of that. I would not want to.
No, this is not the kind of law that we practice, obviously. What can we say about this from a legal standpoint? The thing that comes to my mind is racketeering, because he's being charged with the federal RICO statute. And you hear, I think as the public, you always hear the term racketeering. So-and-so high-profile person was engaged in racketeering. But do we really know what that means? And I'll tell you, I'm not a criminal lawyer. I was curious, what does it really involve for the federal government to find you guilty of racketeering?
I think probably like normal people, when they hear the word racketeering, they most likely associate it with watching mob TV, things like that, right? You hear like Al Capone charged with racketeering, things like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I pulled a definition, and it's a really bad definition because it uses the term racketeering to define racketeering. It's not very helpful, but it's the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's criminal law, so it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt that an enterprise exists. Yeah, that's one. Enterprise exists. And I guess in this case, it's going to be all the freak offs or whatever, this corporation or however P. Diddy was organizing these things. That the enterprise affected interstate commerce. I guess maybe they were buying their baby oil and their lubricants across state lines. That's a pretty easy standard, by the way. In order for the federal government to get involved in something, there has to be some sort of interstate commerce that goes on. And that's a fairly low bar. And that the defendant, in this case, Puff Daddy or P. Diddy, was associated by the enterprise or employed by the enterprise. So probably he was attending the freak offs.
Yeah.
And that the defendant engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity. And that's where I say, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right? I want to know, what is racketeering? I think we've got the dictionary definition of racketeering. Do you have that, Austin?
Yeah, dishonest and fraudulent business dealings. I wish that was more vague.
Yeah. That does not make me very comfortable. So if I'm a business owner and I'm being accused of racketeering, you're just going to say, well, I've done something dishonest and fraudulent.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of businesses out there that engage in dishonest dealings. Now, when you go over the line to fraudulent, that's where I can see getting into some illegal activity. The reason, as Austin points out, this has predominantly been applied to mafioso behavior is because the common examples of racketeering are prostitution, I guess being a pimp, right? Or illegal lottery numbers and things like that. Loan sharking, charging people serious interest in violation of law. That's all the stuff that
illegal gambling rings, things like that.
Right. That's all the stuff the mob did. The first instance of racketeering being applied to a civil act is, I think there was a guy back in the 80s and he did something to rig the junk bond market. And I want to say his name was like Michael Milken.
He was charged with securities and reporting violations. He pleaded guilty to both of those, but not to racketeering or insider trading. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined $600 million.
I don't remember a lot about it, but there was some debate. Yeah. It starts going off the rails when they apply it to civil activity, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to say, you're a pimp, you're operating in illegal gambling or you're racketeering. But
Yeah.
be careful with some of this stuff. The government starts spreading its tentacles over into legitimate businesses.
When it's things that are not explicitly illegal, it becomes like a balancing act. Like, okay, this might be dishonest, but it's not illegal. And like, how much of it is just being a smart business person? I don't know.
Yeah, like I was really mad at some big HVAC companies that came and tried to extort me for like new units when I didn't need a new AC unit. Can I charge those big HVAC companies? Does someone want to charge those guys with racketeering, right? I've heard most of those big HVAC companies are owned by hedge funds. And they're coming and they're charging people 18, 20 grand for units when they need a $700 repair. I think that's racketeering. That's my 2 cents on the matter.
I'm actually really happy now that we are covering this. I wasn't super happy at first, but because this reminded me that there's a new show coming out on I think Max, what used to be HBO. It's Colin Farrell's playing the Penguin in the Batman universe. It's like a mob show about the Penguin. And so I'll be watching that and watching out for anything that I think could be labeled as racketeering as we're doing.
Yes. Yeah. You do go back and watch The Sopranos.
Oh, great show. Yeah.
And tell us about it. All right. Mr. Combs and his freak offs. Obviously, he's in some trouble. I see his net worth plummeting. He's had all kinds of problems, and we'll see how it goes. He's going to expected to plead not guilty and innocent until proven guilty. So we'll see how all that comes out. Our next legal news topic is switching gears completely. Texas Education Commissioner calls for student cell phone ban in school. This is already a thing at a lot of private schools, right? You come to the private school, you put your phone in the bin or whatever, and you don't pack till the end of the day. But in the public school system, we've got to debate this. And the commissioner of education in Texas, he made the recommendation as the concerns rise that phones are generally harmful. What's your take on it, Austin? You think phones good thing, bad thing for kids to have in school?
Phones are a very bad thing for kids to have in school for a lot of different reasons.
It's simple stuff. Yeah. It's the one you would expect. And Morath, the commissioner, he's quoted as saying, if it were in my power, I would have already banned them in all schools in the state. So I would encourage you to consider that as a matter of public policy going forward for our future. People supporting the ban obviously note that the device is distracting to teachers trying to learn. And they're also harmful to mental health. That's an obvious type of thing. Here's a statistic that shocked me as part of this story, and this is the evidence. Now, I don't know if you can blame phones for this, but on the most recent, this came up in this story. On the most recent exam, only 41% of Texas students demonstrate adequate understanding of math. So that means about 60%
Phil,
of all the kids in Texas can't do math.
I think I told you that like in the like some period around like when I took the bar, I was like waiting for my results. I did some substitute teaching in public schools just like during that period of time. And it was crazy because 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds in public high schools, the majority of them that I came across had a lower understanding of math than 11-year-olds in Korea did.
Wow.
Which is like crazy.
It's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. I do remember one time we did a firm event where we went to trivia night and told us that you were like a mental math whiz or something like that.
I am not a mental math whiz. I used to teach it. And that wasn't when I was doing the substitute thing. But yeah, I used to teach it. And because of that, like where I taught, we tried to make sure that people could do mental math of this to the extent that it can be done to solve problems. But yeah. So.
Okay. So I think the reasons to ban phones are pretty obvious, but there are opponents of the law of proposed.
Of course.
And I was curious, what would the opponents have to say? And their position is it prevents young people from exercising personal responsibility.
Well, isn't that the problem?
I just want to know, how did my generation exercise personal responsibility when we didn't have cell phones?
Well, Phil, the answer is obviously you couldn't, right? That's why your generation is so deprived of just any understanding of what personal responsibility is because you didn't have cell phones in school.
I could not exercise the personal responsibility. Some of this stuff that these people come up with is just crazy. Now, there's another reason that the opponents have, the ones that don't want the law to pass. It's legitimate, but it's extremely rare. If there's an emergency situation, there's a shooting on campus, the kid wants to be able to call mom and dad.
Yeah.
I get that. It's just so rare that I don't know that's a reason to oppose something that's really would be a net good.
Yeah. If someone is promoting kids having phones in schools for this reason, but is also wanting wanting teachers to have guns, I think that's a little bit strange.
I don't get that one, but bad school shootings are a bad thing for sure. Yeah. There's way too many of them, but they're not statistically significant in the sense where we can start outlining entire policy based on
the possibility. Yeah, because we have school shootings, you need to have a phone in the school.
Well, we'll see how this law comes out. I think they're set to vote on it, or see what happens if it takes any time. I know that some of my kids, the ones that go to public school, they call me from their school all the time. Like, why are you on your phone? Why are you not learning? Why are you calling? Right. All right, but let's answer some legal questions. And the first one we've got is, what are ground leases and how do they work? So interestingly, I came across this topic when I was reading Leviticus, and that's not a very typical to read. Mind you, I guess I was having trouble sleeping that night. But nonetheless, when we were studying about the year of Jubilee, which is every 7 times 7 years, so every 49 years, there's this idea that the land should be returned to its original owner. And I've got a quote here, a citation, Leviticus 25th chapter 14. It says, if you sell land to any of your own people or buy land from, not take advantage of each other, you are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years, believe, and they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price. When the years are few, you are to decrease the price. Because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. There you have it. That's the first ground lease, as far as I know of, in the history of the world. And you've got this concept of Jubilee, of, okay, you're going to sell, the land is going to be restored at a certain time or reverted to its rightful owner. So the only value in the land is actually the years left on the lease. Or in that time, during agrarian times, the only value would be the years of the crop, the agricultural production of the property. And we have the same concept today with the ground lease. Typically, you see them for 50 years or 99-year ground leases. And a lot of buildings all throughout Texas are leased to somebody for 99 years. And they build gigantic skyscrapers on the. In fact, my family owns a parking garage in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that is on a 99-year ground lease that my great-grandfather leased to somebody. And it's something ridiculous. It's like the total lease price is like $1,000 a month for an entire piece of land in downtown Grand Rapids. And my great-grandfather, Sam, who was a very wise man in the wrecking yard, but who was not very wise when real estate things, he did not put any rent increases on that ground lease. Yeah.
That's always a good idea.
Yeah. So you sign a ground lease like in the 1940s or 50s or whatever, you're going to want to have rent increases that keep up with inflation, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
it's the same thing with rent controlled apartments, right? In certain cities.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, say what's happening in New York. So.
And Seattle. I know someone paying $200 a month in Seattle.
If you're going to do a ground lease, they're not terrible ideas if you're a landlord. You just have to put the right stuff in there. You do a 99-year ground lease can be a very good thing, but you have to account for inflation with what rent bumps or rent increases. So there's no actual transfer of the ownership. It is a lease. The tenant is making rent payments. It's a traditional landlord-tenant situation. It's just for a very long time. And oftentimes these things are developed. I've got it on my mother's side, my grandfather who fought in the Korean War. Austin, you love Korea. So my grandfather fought in the Korean War. As part of his service, he was given a 99-year ground lease to build a cabin on up in Michigan. And the cabin's still there. We really don't want to maintain it because the ground lease might have 5 years left on it or something like that. So there's good and bad things about these properties.
Yeah.
About the ground leases. Then you have reversion. You could put special reversion rights in it. What happens if the property reverts? If somebody does something and the property reverts, so maybe you're not allowed to do something, you can revert to the seller. So you can have all of that type of stuff. But at the end of the lease, there's the natural reversion where it's going to revert to the lessor. So yeah, that's how ground leases work. And a lot of them out there, a lot of people don't know about them, but they are a thing and they are popular. All right, that brings us to our next legal question. And we're talking about, can a landlord, still in landlord-tenant law, can a landlord enter a tenant's property without notice and text? What do you think, Austin?
If it's an emergency, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. Fire, flood, significant property damage. Your landlord can come in there and he can stop destruction to the properties. Or if a tenant makes a request for maintenance, and then you've got abandonment. The tenant can abandon a property in Texas under our typical lease, our TAR residential lease, Texas for realtors. That's the most common lease in Texas. You'll see that you typically post a notice of abandonment on the property. And then once the property is abandoned, you can go and enter the properties. Usually in our leases that we do, whether it's at our law firm or our management company, we will have the landlord give notice for non-emergency situations. The Texas law does not actually require a specific notice period, but good idea for the tenant and landlord to negotiate a notice period, or at least have it in the lease. Have you always leased apartments, Austin, or have you ever leased like a standalone single place?
Always apartments.
Yeah, and most of the big apartment complexes, they do this fairly corporate and professional. But if you're out there living in a small, maybe mom and pop landlord situation, you'll see a lot of variety in how landlords deal with that. All right, that brings us to our next legal question, our third and final legal question. Is it legal to break a hot car window? So it's maybe you see a dog, okay? Cute little dog, and it's 100 degrees outside, and there's a sitting in the car, or left him in the car. Can you break that window in Texas to rescue the dog? What do you think, Austin?
As I said, only if it's a cute dog. If it is not, then no. So I think you can probably. I don't know for certain though.
First of all, let's talk about something. I know everyone loves dogs. If it's a child, a human child, we have a Good Samaritan law in Texas, which says, yeah, you can obviously go and save a child by all means and not be prosecuted for property damage. That's not an issue. But if it's an animal, there's no real Good Samaritan law for animal rescue in Texas. But we do have an animal cruelty law. And that is a thing where you're not supposed to be unkind to your animals. You're not supposed to treat them, harm them, kind of thing. So we do have an animal cruelty law. That's Texas Penal Code, Section 42.092. And that says it is illegal to subject your animal to bad things like leaving them in a hot car. That's not going to help you save the dog in that. But unfortunately, Austin, for all of our animal lovers out there, Texas, the old historical law applies in that a dog is chattel property. And you can't, if it were like an inanimate object, you can't break the window to go and rescue the dog. That could be considered criminal mischief or some sort of other vandalism. But, Austin, good news. There's always the jury.
Yeah, I would love for a jury to see that situation.
Yeah, when we impanel a jury in Dallas County or Harris County, and the prosecutor, the district attorney's office, wants to bring a criminal mischief case against some person who saved a dog from a hot car, I don't see the jury ever convicting that person. And in fact, I could potentially see the prosecutor and the district attorney being not getting reelected for the next term.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
This is an example where you have some technical things on the law that don't always play out.
So Phil, you're saying if you're running for a reelection as a DA, you think that like making that your platform, that you're going to prosecute criminal mischief for people breaking car windows would be bad?
That would be bad. I mean, there are some genius things if you're running for district attorney's office. Like, I think we had a district attorney in Harris County. Okay, we're not going to prosecute marijuana charges. If enough people smoke marijuana or use marijuana, that's a great way to get elected. It's like what Trump and Harris are doing with their campaign promises. They're trying to one up each other. Tax on tips.
Yeah.
It was that old Oprah Winfrey meme where it's like, free stuff for everybody.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. It's funny.
All right. So if you see a cute animal in a car, if you want to rescue it, go ahead. You might be committing criminal mischief, but I doubt you're going to find a jury to convict you. And that's our official legal advice on that, even though in the show, we don't give legal advice.
But we're just going to call it official legal advice.
Exactly. And that brings us to my favorite part of the show, our rant section. And we're talking about should parents be responsible for their children's school-related actions. Everybody is on edge. School shootings are terrible. Violence against schools, all that is terrible stuff. Some of my kids go to public school, and they go to in this school district called Spring Branch ISD. Okay, it's a fairly nice school district. Probably one of the better school districts in the country, I would suspect. And there's been some threats, some kids out there making some threats, whatever. I don't think anything came of the threats, but I got this email from the school district, and it was a rather bizarre email. And it was all about parents. One, it was this vague notice of the threats, but it was also about, okay, parents, we're going to hold you responsible. And it was shocking to me. And I think I've got the quote here from this email. Austin, do you have that quote down there?
I do, yeah. Quote, parents, please be aware that we will hold you responsible for the actions of your child. We reserve the right to exclude you from any SBISD campus or school or district activities. We will also take legal action where possible.
Yeah, so that is extremely interesting. And the idea, it really set me off because it's the idea that these bureaucrats, they have the audacity to mass email thousands of parents saying, we're going to hold you accountable and take legal action. But they don't really have the law on their side for that. And there's been some instances recently, Austin, you can think of, I think there was a Michigan school shooting. There's been some instances where we're talking about parental responsibility. Now, as parents, we all want our kids to do good things, and we don't want them to do awful, terrible things. But if you do have a child that may be suffering from a mental illness and goes and does something awful with a gun and commits a school shooting, do you think the parent ought to be held responsible and accountable for that, Austin?
Not normally without special situations like in the Ethan Crumbley case, but yeah.
Yeah. Can you just tell the listeners briefly about that case and what happened there?
Yeah, there was also a more recent one, but Ethan Crumbley, he committed a school shooting. This is in Michigan, 2021, at Oxford High School. His parents were charged with involuntary manslaughter for buying him the weapon and ignoring warning signs of his mental state. They were charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. And the prosecution was arguing that because they bought him the gun, and they were aware of his intentions to do these things, that they should be responsible in some way.
Yeah. And that the basis of this type of accountability is involuntary manslaughter. Now, there are elements of involuntary manslaughter. Austin's idea of not usually, you have to, as a parent, you don't become vicariously or automatically liable for your child's criminal actions, absent taking some affirmative act or failing to do so.
Yeah. If your child, though, is like constantly saying to you, I'm gonna shoot up my school and stuff like that, and then and you hear that, and then you buy him a gun, yeah, I do think that you probably maybe even voluntary manslaughter at that point.
If those truly are the facts, be it, but the implication by SBISD is we somehow have this power to hold parents accountable. If you're a parent out there, you're doing everything you can, or even if you're not doing everything you can, even if you're just an average parent or a lackadaisical parent. If I'm not sure, you live in Texas, you own a gun, maybe you have a hunting rifle or something, and you've got a kid that maybe suffers from depression and some anxiety and some mental illness. and he goes and gets the hunting rifle and shoots somebody, I don't think that's enough to get you criminal liability in Texas. The prosecutor's going to be up there arguing, well, you knew your son had all these problems, so you shouldn't have owned a hunting rifle.
Or, okay, I actually think I could buy the argument that you knew your son had these problems. Why did you have the hunting rifle and the mantle loaded?
Right. Okay.
Why not have it in a gun case?
Yeah, these are all going to be very fact-specific things.
Yeah.
You have to show, here's the standards for involuntary manslaughter, and not necessarily in Texas, but generally, you typically have to show the parents acted with gross negligence or failed to fulfill a duty of care or preventing their child from, causing harm. The key there is gross negligence. Yeah. And in our hunting rifle example, you got your hunting rifle in a safe and your ammunition in another safe. Somehow the kid manages to get a hold of it. I don't think that's gross negligence.
I don't think,
But if that Crumbly case is true, bought him a gun, that kind of thing, that's pretty. One of the first, the Columbine High School shooting in 1999, Austin, there were no parents were charged criminally at that time, but there were several civil lawsuits, which probably, I don't know how the civil lawsuits came out. But my rant on this is really more just about the school district and the teachers and the education system. They're so shocked, and they're in just such a state of terror and fear of everything going on in these school shootings that sometimes their reactions are just completely over the top and not well thought out. And I really wonder if these school districts have general counsel that look at some of these emails, and there aren't better ways to communicate the threats to the parents and potential actions that the school district may take.
I agree. I do think it'd be weird, especially with the fact that not in the quote that we read, but I believe that the SBIC was implying that need to make sure their kids don't make terroristic threats. It's how can you be responsible for that? If your child's an idiot and is posting stuff on Instagram, et cetera, things like that, do you have to take away their social media if they posted it once? I don't know what that looks like. I think you probably gathered from the course of us talking about this that I'm pretty on board with holding the parents liable if they do exhibit gross negligence related to their child actually committing acts that harm other people. But as far as making terroristic threats, I don't know how you could ever hold the parent liable for threats that their child is making.
That would be a tough one for sure. But all right, that brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silberman. Austin Black has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcasts. Nothing in the show is to be considered legal advice. This is all.
It's definitely not official legal advice.
No, all for entertainment purposes only. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com and see you want it publicly answered in the podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, guys.